Okay, everybody, this is the last mini lecture for this week. So far what we've done is we took a look at kind of an overview to risk management and kind of the approach that I'm taking this semester. Then we went and looked at the supply chain process itself and the integration and the fact that everything is linked together. And if you do something in one area, you have an impact in the other area, which we call trade-off management. And so understanding and being able to look at all that in a holistic way and using all the information you can and the tools that you can to drive that sales and operations process, how that drives through the entire organization. And then we also spoke a little bit about the fact that the organization itself, or the organizations, if you will, tend to be the biggest challenge in attaining the optimum supply chain organizational process, which quite frankly, I don't think I know anybody that's ever done that. So academics talk about it a lot, but it's very rare in practice. Some people get close, and some companies that you probably know don't ever get close and have no plans on getting close. So they like the way they run their organizations, and that's all part of the culture that when you enter into an organization, a firm, whether it's goods or services, that is a huge part of what you have to work with. So this last lecture is on supply chain risk. And we kind of alluded to some of it in the first one, but we're going to kind of go back and hit it from a supply chain perspective. So here we go. Not quite as long as the last one. So what we're really saying here is how big's your appetite? You know, that's really what it gets down to, is how big is your appetite for risk? I mean, if you're willing to accept any risk and all risk, then fine. If you want to mitigate some parts of risk or perhaps come up with a secondary supplier instead of just a one supplier, instead of an exclusive supplier relationship, then that's something else. So this is all about appetite, and it's understanding what it is you need to do in order to make that work. So this is the last time we'll be talking about overall risk management until week 15. So from here on out, we'll be talking about safety. Then we'll go into, we'll spend several weeks on safety as we go through the modes and talk about what's going on the safety side. And safety is part of risk. Security is part of risk. Black swans are all part of risk. So this whole thing of safety, security, and disaster is all part of this overall risk umbrella, and your ability to mitigate it is your ability to understand it. And we'll bring out some things and talk about some things, and I look forward to seeing your feedback on whether or not we're hitting the mark. So as I said, this is also from UT, and it's on managing risk in the supply chain. This chart is not all of it, but basically it comes down to these three basic targets. You have to identify the risk, you have to prioritize that risk, and you have to mitigate whatever you prioritize. And the fact is risk is present in the supply chain every single day, and it's a fact of life for any supply chain, and there's always some element of risk, and it doesn't matter whether you're sourcing globally or sourcing domestically, there is an element of risk in everything you do. And so the issue is to understand that, and to look and come up with your consensus as to what the chances of that risk having, and then what is the impact of that risk on your company financially, and then how do you mitigate that risk. And that's what risk assessment is all about. It's basic, but it's extraordinarily complicated to pull all the information available on all of the nodes or network points that exist within a lot of companies. I mean, there are companies people don't know who their major suppliers are, and it's because that's not what they do. They don't know that. They just know they get it from Amazon, but they don't know how much they get from Amazon. So it's that kind of approach that you have to look at. So let's go through this. Risk is a fact of life, and risk takes place in a multiplicity of ways. It starts with one of the biggest ones, quality. Believe it or not, the quality of product is one of the overarching risks that's out there. And uh, having experienced that directly and worked with some clients before on understanding that quality side, this really is the big thing. One of the really one of the bigger things is this. So you can just kind of look down here. I'm not going to read them to you. There are things that you can control. There's things you never control, which are the black swans. There are other issues that can come up, political, otherwise, regulatory can come up. If there's a regulation passed that requires you to put a certain type of technology in, you don't have the money to put it in, you just went out of business. And that's happening a lot to the trucking companies right now. So, and that changes the landscape and the capacity availability of transportation going forward. So there's for every action, there's a reaction, and that's what some of this is. So this is just a short list of things that are, risk that you're dealing with. And if you look at it on a broader area, if you look at the global side, you're not only dealing with all those risks that we saw on the previous slide, you're dealing with time. So you have much longer lead times. You have the ability to have, because there's so many more handoffs in the process, all of these handoffs then can potentially cause disruptions. You have governmental actions. I mean, there's nothing to keep the US government or the Chinese government or the UK government or anybody from erecting a barrier this afternoon, on some kind of a import or export activity. So all these things are real that occurs. And we talked a little bit about the unstructured data flows. It's the fact that most companies are overwhelmed by the amount of unstructured data that's out there and are simply really just not prepared to deal with it at all. But it's crucial and critical in order to get to this last point, which is actionable visibility, to know what's going on where on a strategic basis, and using that information to feed back into your enterprise planning model and make sure that you're on target and understand where you're not on target and come up with a plan to mollify that. So looking again at what UT came up with, this is I showed you that list, but here's how they ranked it. So quality was the #1 thing keeping supply chain managers awake at night, followed by inventory, followed by this, blah, blah, blah. Okay, and notice that terrorism is one of the ranked pretty much at the bottom. Cybersecurity, you can't say it's not ranked on the average. It's probably more like the average. I think this is your old data. I would suggest to you that it will probably move over here a little more. I think when we talk about one of the things when we talk about safety next week is the fact that for a lot of the regulatory agencies, while safety was probably the top priority, security is now at the same level as safety. And almost all the agencies, regulatory agencies, are very focused on security now. And so it's sharing that top spot with safety as being their mission. So that's probably going to change, but this is what it was. But it's the interesting one again is the quality one, is the fact that you wait all this time and you get a product and the product doesn't work the way you thought, or it's not acceptable in the market, or something else happened, or you ordered 100 and you get 80. All sorts of things can happen in that arena. So what they found out is that this again is from the UT, is basically that this whole activity requires a very formal documented process. And many companies take the position is if we don't have a crisis, we don't need to spend any time to really work on this. And so it goes to the end of the line. But then when it does happen, then you find that you're very ill prepared, and you generally will make a bad decision, not the wrong decision, because there's no such thing, but a bad decision rather than if you thought about it and really put together an actionable plan. And as I said before, supply chain executives are generally at the center of this because somewhere around here it's got something to do with the customer, it's got something to do with a supplier, or it has something to do with delivery, and you can't do it. So what are you going to do? And the more expanded it is, the less control you have over all the various pieces, which is the requirement to have visibility. Is everything moving the way it needs to move, as it's supposed to move, in accordance with the plan, and in accordance with whatever that plan was, whether it's a due date on a PO or whatever. Everybody in the room has to be aware of there's an exception to the plan, and then be able to take a look at that and say, what does that mean to us going forward? Will we make our demand plan, or will we not make our demand plan? Disruptions are not unusual. And the fact is that when there is a disruption, it can be quite painful to the organization. And this is, again, some of the summarization and the feedback that came from the study from UT. They looked at 800 disruptions over the past few years, and this is what they saw. They saw that companies take a hit when there's a major disruption. The financial health of the company takes a hit, and it can absolutely be devastating. There's no question about it. Doesn't mean you go out of business, but it takes you a while to regain the same market position that you were in, because people will move away from you and won't come back without a reason to make a change. So this is, I think, very interesting. It doesn't mean it's going to apply to everybody. This is just what UT found in their study. Maybe you want to read the study. I'm sure if you just go to the Supply Chain Institute at Tennessee, you can download this paper. We talked about this already. The fact that that's why it is important is because it does link directly to financial performance. So this is redundant in that sense. But if you elect to show this to your CFO, you might want to have that slide in there. And again, if it can't, the fact that it can't be eradicated, it can be identified. If it can be identified, it can be assessed. If it can be assessed, it can be quantified, and it can be mitigated. And once again, this risk is not just the risk of a hurricane. I mean, I can tell you right now, there's a risk that the Louisiana Crest LNG ports are going to be underwater in 25 years. There is a risk that that is going to happen. And there's very little being done to mitigate that risk. So right there, you have a situation where here's the country, the United States, is migrating away from oil into natural gas as alternative fuels in a big way. And those ports, which bring in some of that product, they bring in a relatively small port, but they do bring it in. And there's a potential in the next 25, and maybe the range might be 35 or 40 or even 50 years, that says that the Gulf, as we know it right now, will be underwater as a result of global warming. Believe that or not, but the fact that seas are rising. And those ports are very vulnerable right now. There's 6 ports, and of the top 10 ports in the world that are considered at risk, those are 6. So that's on the table right now. So what are you doing about it? That would be my question. And you need to find that kind. You need to take a look at that and say, what does that risk mean to me? What kind of risk is there out there that's similar to that? And what does it mean to me? And what am I being done about it? So and if you do that, then, and you can build this plan, you can build this consensus, you're going to be ahead of a lot of your competitors, which is going to put you in a much better situation. So there's 2 types of risk as we define it. One is the day-to-day, which is just the things that happen. This is the transactional side. It does include things that you have to manage, such as theft, for example. Theft is something we'll talk about. We talk about security. But delays can be security related. Production problems can be safety and security related. Shortages can be security and safety related, and cybersecurity. And then there's a black swan. So this is where it all goes to hell in a handbasket. And I have an article for you to read, which is on Walmart. and it's about Walmart's response to disaster preparedness. I think you find it very interesting. I've done a lot of business with Walmart over the years, and they are absolutely phenomenal at pre-positioning product, as is Home Depot, equally. In advance of these, they have their own their own weather department. They do their own forecasting of these kinds of things, the things that actually and really looking, that we've been talking about here too, is that if you do business with Walmart, ask them what they think, because they probably have a better answer than you can get yourself. So when this happens, this can be any number of things. One that comes to mind that I had to deal with is the FDA put a recall notice on a product we made because they didn't like the data we sent in. We had to pull it from the market. Well, we didn't have to pull it all. We only had to pull specific lots or batches of particular product. But that means we had to track those particular batches of product. Well, we had tracked those particular batches of product. So overnight, we had to pull it out of, we had to get all the notices out to all of our customers, all of our distributors saying this product has to come back. And then we either replaced it or we went on a shortage. We went on an allocation process, which is what we did. But we already had that plan in place and we had it up and ready to go. And as a result of that action, which they rescinded, by the way, but we were able to compensate with an action plan that was actionable and put it into place within a very short period of time and document it back to the FDA that we had successfully pulled the product from the market. It was not fun, by the way, but that's one that falls on this side over here. And I used the word apathy in the first lecture, but it's hard to understand this because I think most of us that are in the supply chain field really believe that we do need to identify what these risks are, what the probability of them is, understand the assessment, and what the financial impact of that is, and then create some kind of mitigation plan. And this is the nature of the world that we work in and we live in within supply chain. And we shouldn't have to be told to do this. I think that's the other point, is that you should know intuitively or really start to think about, let's talk about this and let's figure out what we can do. And one of the first places you can go is to your financial side and just get a recap of the accounts payable log and say, well, who are we paying and for what? And is it important or is it not important? And what's it going to do to us if that guy goes away? And what do we know about that guy? Do you know this financial situation? Do you know what his database management, security management structure looks like? So those are, as you do this and you go a little deeper, that's why you get into this collaborative mode of, hey, I want to work with you, but I need to make sure you're doing what I need you to do. And that means that you have to manage your suppliers. You can't just outsource it and not manage. That's an absolute disaster when that happens. So again, the twist is you need to document the process. You need to have facility loss and backup, supplier loss, understand your risks. If you have a carrier, there's only one carrier that offers the service that you need. You better have a plan in case that carrier goes under, particularly if it's an ocean carrier right now, because there's tremendous risk right now in ocean carriers, and come up with a strategy to mitigate this. A lot of this is repetitive. So here's the final slide in this one, which is here's in essence really what, if you want to do this is kind of what the bullet points are. And so you would develop a process map basically that identifies your nodes. You would maybe color code them for prioritization. And just really draw your firm and all of your connections and go through a process like this on those that really will have an impact on the company. Like I said, MRO, no. You don't need to worry about that. But if you have somebody that's making a component or is making an assembly for you or whatever, then you want to go through this process of understanding what is the magnitude of that, what's the chance of that happening, which means you have to know perhaps more about that supplier than you did when you selected them as a supplier. So you may have to kind of go back into it a little bit because some suppliers, as we know, have found out are using child labor. And under the customs rules, if that's determined, that product can't even come into the United States anymore. So, in other countries as well. So, do you really know your supplier's supply chain? Because that's part of your supply chain. And that's at tier one, tier two, and tier three. And even though it may be your supplier, your tier one guy's got great data management, he exchanges your data with a tier two guy in some way, shape, or form. And if that individual or if that company does not have that, then it's possible that someone could come in and hack through that. So this is what it's all about. This is what we're looking at in managing risk. And hopefully that gives you a good sense or a good place to start from, because now we're going to take this risk and we're going to slice it. So going forward, we're going to talk about safety for the next few weeks, and I'll keep feeding you articles that are current, hopefully current articles, and some of the things that are going on in this space. So you have an opportunity to look at them. So thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you week 2.